Hello and welcome to Thursday's video recording. This is almost the end of the week, so I know you guys are probably ready for the weekend. But before we get there, let's go over Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is going to be over handling conflict, cultural diversity, and also workplace relationships. So we'll start by giving you just some opening thoughts that I was thinking about, and it relates to the chapter. What I wanted to tell you, or what I wanted to say, is that conflict, cultural diversities, and interpersonal relationships affect all organizations, regardless of their sizes or their types. So these are things that we have to work through regardless of where we basically work. More productive and more satisfied employees learn how to handle conflict in a positive way, and they understand and appreciate cultural diversities and differences, and they develop and maintain strong interpersonal relationships with their managers and their fellow co-workers, and also important to the whole key is the customers. So those are really key important factors that we are going to be discussing. The first that we're going to be discussing is conflict management, which is so important. So how do we handle it? How do we handle conflict management? Usually in the workplace, we will experience usually two types of conflict. There's the A-type conflict, which really is a relational conflict that sidetracks the team from the issues because it's more of an emotional type conflict. And it creates defensiveness, and it also creates anger. Usually, A-type conflict arises usually in a team with uncertain relationships and very weak trust. It's likely to be definitely an emotional thing that's attached to it, to a topic that they are basically conflicted about. The feedback process can be awkward and evaluative, and disagreements can become very personal in this type of conflict. And usually an A-team or A-type conflict spends most of its energies dealing with emotions rather than solving the problems. And the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to A-type conflict is that for a A-type team to succeed, it's usually a very slim chance without strong steps taken forward, like maybe even having to develop a new team leader, or maybe even having to just get new members, or lastly, it would be like having to train the team so that we can understand or get back to the issue, the problem, more so than the emotions. The second type of conflict is a C-type conflict, and usually this is a cognitive type conflict, and it improves team productivity and the relationships because team members with strong relationships and mutual trust, they make it work. And team members are open to serious debate and disagreements. The ideas are separate from the person. So in other words, they're not going to try to make it personal. They're going to try to separate the problem from the emotions. And the feedback is in the form of descriptive, not evaluative questions. Negative conflict is managed by using strategies, and a designated devil advocate helps to avoid groupthink. So it's really important that we try to maintain a C-type conflict status within the organization. So therefore, we don't have like a whole lot of emotions flying everywhere and nothing basically getting done. There are some conflict strategies that we should try to work on, and there are usually 5 different common conflict strategies or methods for handling conflict that we are going to discuss. The first one is something called avoiding. And in avoiding or withdrawal, it entails showing low levels of assertiveness and cooperation. It's maintaining the fact that they want to be neutral at all costs and avoid the situation, or avoiding any type of conflict. So that's not really good, but that's what some people do. The second type is accommodating. And with accommodating or smoothing, it entails valuing cooperation over assertiveness. So they want to be cooperative. They don't want to be assertive. And they also view open conflict as destructive. And seeing surface harmony is important for maintaining good relationships. So in other words, they're not really helping. They're just basically just accommodating. The third type of conflict strategy is something called compromise. And in compromising, which happens in this level, it entails taking a middle of the road stand on assertiveness and cooperation. And they view conflict as something that can be solved without direct confrontation. They want to seek a solution acceptable to everyone, and they view compromise as a backup choice. So they want to compromise. So they're just usually in the middle here, and they're in between being cooperative and assertive. They just basically are there. They just always want to compromise. So now let's try to find something that's going to make all of us happy. Then there's competitive. And competitive is something that's very forceful. It entails viewing personal goals as more important than the goals of others. You know, I'm very competitive, and I want to make sure this gets done. So we're going to do it my way so that I make sure it's going to get done. They perceive conflict as a win-lose situation or a power struggle, and having great respect of power that only more powerful person will prevail. And lastly, there's collaboration or problem solving. It entails valuing high cooperation and assertiveness, and it views conflict as beneficial if handled openly or handled in the right way. And it helps to guide the group through problem solving and expanding time and efforts to reach a consensus, which is very important. You want to reach a consensus. You want everyone to not necessarily agree with each other, but there's a consensus. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is how things are going to be happening. So basically, reaching a consensus is very important. And when you reach a consensus when it comes to conflict management, it depends on 3 possible outcomes. And you want to make sure that you clarify the situation. You set aside the conflict solutions temporarily and you seek a new solution. Through brainstorming, you all get together and you're all trying to decide, okay, how are we going to resolve this? And within that, there are basically three strategies that can take place. There's the win-win strategy, and then there's the win-lose, and then there's the lose-lose. So we're going to talk about all three of these strategies. The first strategy we're going to discuss is the win-lose strategy. In the win-lose, only one party achieves its objective. So usually that's the person that's very competitive. Remember, we talked about the person that has a competitive style. And in the competition or the competitiveness, they are very forceful. And they want to make sure that I don't care whether or not you lose or not. It's all me being able to get my point done. So in the win-lose, you can see how that's not a very good strategy. But in some instances, that is what happens. Then there's the lose-lose. In the lose-lose, neither party achieves its objectives. Basically, that's when you basically just compromise. Or sometimes that's when you are being accommodating or you just avoid the issue altogether. So that's a lose-lose, which is not very well done either. Then there's the win-win, where there is definitely collaboration and definitely you reach a consensus. That's when all parties receive an acceptable gain. So basically that's when everybody basically ends up winning, and you definitely have reached a consensus and you do something that's best for everyone involved, not just you. The next thing that we are going to discuss in the chapter is the cultural differences and how they relate to conflict. You know that there are a lot of cultural similarities and differences, and they can be analyzed based on whether it's an individualistic or collectivist, or maybe because it's a high or low context, or many other characteristics. But we basically want to focus on two different cultural differences. The first one is cultures that believe in individualistic results. And these can be seen in mainly the United States, where it tends to value the individual, definitely. And it's more important that the individual rights are more important than the group rights, and they to focus on problem solving, value, autonomy, democracy. They definitely prefer competition, but sometimes they use collaboration and compromise. So this is an individualistic culture, one that definitely looks at the individual. Then there are also collective cultures. And within those cultures, mainly that's an Asian culture, and they tend to value group membership. It's important to understand like what group are you connected to. And they also tend to value goals and obligations, and they focus on relationships. They value empathy and listening and prefer avoidance because they don't want any conflict. That's how they basically preserve their face or save face, basically, as they would say it in an Asian culture. You know, you need to save your face. So that is very important that you value other people, and especially the group that you are associated with. The second thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to culture differences in the workplace is context. And context is important when it comes to conflict, because context is defined as the information that surrounds an event. It's either going to be high or low context cultures. In high context cultures, there are usually things that rely minimally on spoken words, tend to be indirect and implicit, and are homogenous. So in other words, the messages that are sent in or high context cultures are very brief, indirect. Like, this is what I want to have done. Okay, thank you, bye. So basically the receiver's responsible for the meaning. And the meaning is usually obtained from the setting or the culture and the nonverbal communication, and words are of minimal importance. So those are high context cultures. Then there's also low context cultures, which is like in the United States, because in low context cultures it's definitely like individualistic culture, and they tend to rely a lot on messages that are clearly spelled out, direct and explicit. So you can see the difference of how this could definitely cause conflict if you work within an Asian surrounding. They believe in very short, minimal use of words, whereas in individualistic context cultures, they believe, or the ones that have low context cultures, they believe in definitely making sure that what they speak is heard. So they use a lot of words, and nonverbal is of minimal importance. They don't care whether or not you got it or not. They just want to make sure that they convey by words everything that they mean. But regardless of the fact that there might be a lot of cultural differences, communication can always be improved in the surrounding so that there aren't any types of conflict that can happen. So remember, when it comes to intercultural conflict, that there are more than one reasonable position in a conflict. And also look for triggers that might be causing the conflict. And I'll definitely use a neutral third party if you need to help to mediate, so that therefore the conflict can be resolved. The development and maintenance of work relationships affects the organization a lot. Whether there's job satisfaction, there's trust and good morale. Are all of the communication needs being met? Do you see a lot of absenteeism or turnover? Is your organization creative and innovative and productive? And is there a lot of commitment to the organization? So all these things play into it. Even though there's a lot of cultural things going on, remember, there are a lot of things that can happen or can trigger the conflict, and we need to work to mediate so that we can discover what the conflict is and work hard to resolve it. So that brings us to the relationships in the workplace. And with the relationships, we need to, like we said, focus on whether or not the employees are satisfied, whether there's good morale and trust, whether there's a lot of absenteeism, commitment. All those things play into the relationships, regardless of the cultural conflict. And one thing that is very important to being able to have these things at a high level is effective feedback. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 1. But feedback is very important. And usually everything stems from feedback and self-disclosure, which we will talk about later. But feedback response messages with information, opinions, and feelings. Those are the things that are important. Is a message directed towards the behavior or to the person? Make sure your feedback is not based towards. Remember, we said not to have your feedback based towards the person, or not for it to be evaluative, not giving advice. All these things are what we discussed in chapter 1. It includes limited information, and it's immediate and well-timed, and allows for face saving, for you to be able to explain so that you can make sure that everything is heard. So that's one thing that we can do so that we have effective feedback. And also in effective self-disclosure. Sorry about that. Effective self-disclosure is also very important. Self-disclosure is usually the voluntary reveals unknown information, opinions, and feelings. When you self-disclose, that's what you are basically doing. But we should only self-disclose when it's used to develop or maintain relationships. And we should only self-disclose at moderate levels. And it should be mutually shared. So in other words, if I share something, then you should definitely share it with somebody that's going to share something back. It should be gradual. And remember that self-disclosure also involves risk. So what you disclose can be risky, but it can be helpful depending on how you want to share it and that it is mutually shared. Remember that too much or too little feedback or self-disclosure can hurt the communication and relationships in the workplace. So basically, we have to be able to monitor the feedback, and we have to definitely monitor our self-disclosure. Lastly, we will discuss communication styles. And communication styles basically vary according to the amount of feedback and the amount of disclosure that happens. Will help to describe what type of communication styles that are happening. The first communication style that we are going to discuss is something called the private style. And the private style communicators are more comfortable working with things more than working with people. They like working by themselves. They are low on feedback, and they are low on self-disclosure and assertiveness. They are more successful when little personal interaction is required. They are less successful when high interpersonal interactions is required. So if they have to be in groups or whatever, they're not going to do a very good job. Or they have to be assigned to teams, they're not going to like that. They usually like just working by themselves. Just leave me alone, give me a job, let me do it. These are the private style communicators. The second style that we're going to talk about is something called the dominant style. And in the dominant style or dominant style communicators, they strive in situations where they can demonstrate their expertise and their experience. They thrive. They are low on feedback. They are high on disclosure and assertiveness. They are viewed as critical, demanding, and authoritarian. The dominant communicators are more successful when they need their expertise to be shown because they need to take charge. A crisis there or a change occurs and an immediate a decision is needed, they shine. They are less successful when personal problems are numerous. and subordinates expect to make their own decisions, and creativity and risk-taking are critical. So dominant style persons work best when you need a decision right now. They definitely shine. The third communication style that we're going to talk about is the sociable style. And with the sociable style, communicators are interested in people. They are usually good listeners and generally are well liked, although they do avoid conflict and may limit what they share, hiding their true feelings because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So they are just a sociable person. Everybody likes them and they tend to like everybody else, even though they might be hiding their feelings, but that's how they are. They are low on disclosure because they don't like to disclose anything about themselves, but they are high in feedback. They may mistrust people or desire social acceptance, so they want everybody to like them. They form basically a one-way relationship. They are more successful when a social environment is expected, and they are needed. They like teamwork, and they rarely solve problems, and they adequately perform. Their adequate performance is all that is expected. So they just basically do what's needed for them to just get by and have everybody still like them. The last style of communication that we're going to discuss is the open style. Open style communicators are equally interested in people's needs and the company productivity and are more more accepting of other people and how other people feel. They are high on feedback. They are high on disclosure. They may disclose too much too soon and ask for too much feedback sometimes. That might be a fallacy of the open style communicator. But many organizations do not have an open climate, and employees can be uncomfortable when they are around open communicators. It is least successful when upper management or employees view the open style negatively. Tasks are simple and require no teamwork, and an immediate decision is needed. So this is when the open style person shines. But remember, like, a lot of people may not like the open style person because, like I said, their feedback is high and their disclosure is high. So they usually will tell everything about themselves, and they will tell everything about everybody else also. So that's the open style communicator. Well, that's all we have for today's lesson. So let's summarize chapter 3. In chapter 3, we discussed a lot about conflict, and you have to understand that conflict is something that is completely unavoidable. That there are two types of conflict, the A type and the C type. We also talked about cultures and how it plays an important role in a successful workplace. We talked about individualistic versus collective cultures, low context versus high context cultures. We also talked about the 3 dimensions and how there are win-win, lose-lose, and win and win-lose. Building and maintaining workplace relationships are very important. The style of communications that we talked about was private, dominant, sociable, and open. All these are relevant and vary in levels of feedback and responsiveness and in disclosure and assertiveness. Each style of communication has their strengths and it also has their weaknesses. Remember, you can change your styles, but do it gradually with feedback from your fellow employees or your manager or whatever. But whatever style works best with whatever organization you work in, try to adapt your style so that you can best fit the type of organization you want to work for. Well, that's all. And remember that our week ends on Sunday night at 11:59. So make sure that you have all of your work completed for Unit 1. This is the end of Unit 1, and I hope that you found this unit very, very helpful. It's a start in what we need to be better workplace communicators. And I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.